Okay, my name is Sharon Kawasaki-Chan. I was born in Nakus, BC, and my birth date is July 28th, 1947.
My name is Vickie Fukui. I was born in Maple Ridge, which is now called Haney, part of, the opposite. It's now called Maple Ridge. And my birthday is August the 8th, 1939. So,
Okay, Yoshie, Kurita. Where was I born? In Vancouver, BC in 1937, December 4th.
I think my grandfather was the first to come to Canada. Gosh, I can't remember the exact year, but it must be about 1921. I'm just guessing. But anyways, and then my mother was actually born in Steveston, and my dad was born in Vancouver. My mother went to Japanese school, and my dad went back to Japan when he was 5 months old, so he was educated in Japan. But once he returned back to Vancouver, he went to Vancouver Island to join his dad in the sawmill in Nanu's Bay. And from there, I think after 1942, he was sent to Slocan. So my mother was also interned in Slocan. They were married there, and my two sisters were born in Slocan. And I was born in Nakus, and in 1950, we came back to Vancouver, and my first language was Japanese. And so my dad was very traditional, so always spoke Japanese until he was in his 90s. We just a habit, we just spoke Japanese. Probably not the proper Japanese, but yeah. So and then my dad volunteered quite a bit at the church and the school. So I actually went to the same school as my mom, and then I had a daughter, so Christine actually went to the Japanese school as well. My mom went to the Vancouver Japanese school on Alexander Street because they were living in that Japantown area. And when we came back in 1950, my oldest sister started there, and then when I was 5, I was enrolled there. And then later on, when I had a daughter, we just continued with the same school, the Japanese school.
yes, my grandparents came to Maple Ridge with their son, Toshio, and they bought some land, and they decided that my dad, Toshio, should get married, so he went back to Japan and selected a wife, and my mother came to Maple Ridge, and she had a very large family. There were 7 of us all total. The first 5 first children, they had a son, and he died at 7 years old. And then we got evacuated to Popoff, Slocan, and New Denver. And we were, my bottom 3 of us were born later because my brother died, so it ended up with and then there were 7 of us, and all of us were girls, and the oldest one was 16, and the youngest one was 1 year old. And then my dad died in 1943, and so my mother had to raise all of us. My 2 sisters were extremely hard to help my mother because we were from such a large family. And after we moved to Slocan, New Denver, and then we came back to Vancouver because there'd be more education for the family.
Oh, well, I was born in Vancouver. My parents had a dry cleaning business, and then we were evacuated to Coaldale during the war, and my brothers were born there. And after Coaldale, we were free to move around, so we went to Lethbridge, and we were in Lethbridge until 1956, and then we came into Vancouver. Well, my grandfather was very involved with forming a church in Coaldale. And then after my grandfather died on the farm there, and my father commuted to Lethbridge to work, and he got involved with the Coaldale church. And then when we went to Lethbridge, he was involved with the starting of the Lethbridge church in North Lethbridge. And then from North Lethbridge, I think we went into Lethbridge. And then he came to the coast first, and we followed, my brothers and I, we followed, because I remember going to Britannia in 56. Yeah, and my brothers went to Seymour School. Well, my father was born in Japan. My mother was born in Canada. And I don't know to what extent she was educated in Canada, but she went to dressmaking school there. And she was a dressmaker when they married. And my first language? Oh, that's a good question. Because I would suppose it would be Japanese until my brothers were born, because my brothers didn't speak English, didn't speak Japanese. So it was, once we started in school, it was English, more or less. And Dad was the one that spoke in Japanese, and of course we understood what he said. But we didn't really speak Japanese unless it was just your questions and answers. And then, well, we did go to Japanese school when we came back to, we did go to Japanese school in Lethbridge with Sato Sensei. And then when we came to the coast, we walked to Alexander Street for Japanese school. And I remember going. I don't know what happened to my brothers.
My father went back to Japan, selected a wife, came back, and we mostly spoke with our sisters because we had so many sisters. And so Japanese was our first language until we started school. And then after I started getting more involved in Japanese school when my daughter was 5 years old. So we spoke mostly English, but we knew very little Japanese, but we were talking to my mother in Japanese, but we spent most of our time with my older sister talking to each other, so I didn't really.
Our family moved to Vancouver when I was 3, so the only memories I can see are the photos. And I think it snowed there a lot, but no, I don't have any memories at all. Well, I vaguely remember it, but because I was the youngest, my mom wanted me to start school a little bit earlier, so I did start to go to Japanese school when I was 5, but I went to English school when I was 6 years old. But like I mentioned to you, my dad's very traditional, so we spoke Japanese most of the time. And it was not that proper Japanese you hear from people from Japan. It was our so-called local Vancouver Japanese, yeah. Well, our basic like food was rice, you know, and we're brought up on rice. Oh gosh, that's so long ago. um, Nothing fancy. My uncles were fishermen, so we were lucky to get a lot of their seafood. You know, they would just give us the extra they had. So, yeah, we were brought up eating a lot of fish and seafood, and my mom's aunt had that tofu shop, so it was just regular food, nothing fancy. Well, I guess just having rice, having the spinach, just having some sort of fish, and it's usually a salted fish, a tofu, you know, made with soya sauce with other vegetables in it. Yeah, but, and then on the weekends we had, it's called yoshoku, like it was potatoes and meat or chicken.
What does yoshoku mean? Could you just explain that?
Oh, yoshoku, is that Vancouver Japanese? No. Okay.
I know what it means.
Okay. Yoshoku is Canadian food. Yeah,
Like examples?
like having like even fish and chips, or you know, potatoes and some kind of a meat dish with chicken and a vegetable. Yeah, it was without rice. Yeah.
When we were young, we were very poor, and so all I remember mostly was my mom frying potatoes and getting some bacon to make a supper. And lots of times my sisters had to cook and make sure we were fed. And one time my sister fed us something rotten. So the three younger children went to the hospital because we were suffering from diarrhea. It was sad anyways, but we managed them. But we stayed healthy right through our lives. None of us really got sick other than that time. Yeah. And then that's why my mother went to cooking school with her friends in New Denver, and she learned a lot about cooking excellent food like chow mein and using up all the vegetables that grew in our garden in the front. And she became a very good cook. We used to go looking for warabi and Fukui at that time, and we met.
Could you explain? I don't think everybody knows what warabi and Fukui is. Could you sort of explain that?
It's wild, grown in funny places, and we had to go up the mountain climbing and looking for these warabi and Fukui, yeah. But they tasted very good once they were made properly, and yeah.
Well, rice was rare because I remember we were rationed, you know. So we had rice and potatoes and the vegetables, you know, whatever we had on the farm. My mother cooked, and it was like a sukiyaki style, you know, with the shoyu and the ajitsuke, and so that was the okazu, and then it was generally rice, and then potatoes. Usually potatoes meant stew. You know, and then there were times when beef was rare, and we used to get horse meat, and that was That was rich, and actually it was very lean, so it wasn't bad, once you mix it with the vegetables and that. Oh, we never had a rice cooker until we came to Vancouver. So it was, the old style where you bring it up to a boil and then you put it simmer and that. So that was rice. So, and in those days, as I said, we were rationed for it, and then in those days you had to wash the rice because they didn't have they had the talc on them, and then also they weren't sorted, so we had to sort the rice out while we were washing it.
What do you mean by sorting the rice?
Because you got the other kernels in with it, the ones that were unedible, the other husks and the bran of the rice, because the rice at that time wasn't like our rice now where it's all white, eh? So that was our way we, cooked the rice.
Oh, actually, when we came back to the coast, we lived on Alexander Street, which was only 1 block away from the Japanese school. And my parents rented a house, and we were on the main floor, and the Kamiyas were upstairs. And my dad was able to get a job with Matsumoto Shipyard because he's got carpentry background, and my mom stayed at home, and we just played with, and there were a few Japanese families that had moved back into that area too, so it was just nice to go out and play with them. And I haven't seen them for years, but it's nice to bump into somebody like that after like 60 or 70 years ago. But I think, and then my mom was trying to work to try to get a down payment for a house, but it was very, very difficult because she was doing dressmaking, and I don't think she worked at that time at all. And so once we started Japanese school, my mom started to volunteer there as well. And my dad, of course, because of his handiwork, he was actually, I don't know what year he did it, but he built the cupboards in the kitchen of the Japanese school. And whenever there was a problem, he'd just go and help and try to fix it. Yeah. So that was just the beginning, and it was kind of nice because he didn't speak English. He had to stay with the community, and he just got by. And he was quite determined. But I think later on, it would have been nice if he could speak English, because when you're hospitalized, you don't get a Japanese doctor as a specialist, so here I go to be the interpreter. But, it was okay, yeah.
When we came back to Vancouver, it was in August 27th, 1952, and I was 13, and my sister was 10 years old, and we had to go from New Denver to Nelson, and that was about 66 miles by bus, and we never traveled in buses before, so I was responsible to make sure we got to Nelson, and both my mom and my younger sister got sick on the bus, and I had to try and look after them. And we were dressed so much alike, my sister and I, in Nelson, and waiting for the train to come to Vancouver. We were so nervous that we're going to miss the train that we took turns running into the station master and asking, what time is our train coming? Is it on time? And we spent hours, because we stayed in Nelson about 6 or 7 hours. And then we were met in Vancouver by my oldest sisters, and we didn't know anything about escalators. So we were walking up the escalators and trying to meet them. And after we got to meet our sisters, they had bought a store, so my mom would have some thing to do to make a living for us. So my oldest sisters had to work really hard, because after they started working, they would come home and then they would look after the stores. This went on for years and years until we all grew up and we all got married slowly. It was a confectionery store that my mom ran, and she didn't speak any English. So my older sister, who went to Kitsilano with me, we had to come home at lunch hour to make sure these bad boys weren't stealing from us. And then after my older sisters that were working came home, and they had to work in the store till 11 o'clock. And so they had a hard life.
After Alberta, well, as I said, Dad came out first to the coast and he got a job. And he got a job at the dry cleaners there, and then we followed after that. And then, because at that time, I think I entered Britannia in grade 10, I think. I think it was in grade 10. And my brothers were in Seymour School. Yeah, I think that was the way it went. I see Miyako, and there's a few people here I notice in here. And Kocho Sensei and Iwata-san. Oh, I think that's me, eh? Does that look like me?
Yeah, I think so.
And then that's a Saimoto girl, Sayoko. Sayoko, and then this. I think this is me. Up here. And how old was I then? So I was going to Britannia, so that was in grade 10, so that would make me what? Started school at 17. I was 17 then? I guess so, if you do the calculation.
These are all my sisters taken in New Denver when my oldest sister was close to 21. She was maybe 23 years old. Yeah.
Who was your oldest? Akemi?
Yes, Marge.
Akemi and then Yoko?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then Yoko,
Yeah.
and then Joan. Yeah.
Oh, Joan. Joan was
Yeah.
the third one. Yeah,
And
because
then these are the younger ones.
Harriet,
This is my youngest sister.
Claire.
Yeah.
Where are you, Vickie?
I'm here.
You're Vickie there.
Yeah.
And this is Harriet?
Harriet's over there.
Harriet's over there. Who's this?
Kay.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
My mom and dad, my two sisters, and myself. And this was taken in Vancouver in 1950. And I just had a couple of these photos just to show you how much snow we had in the cusp. Yeah. But you know what? We're not even wearing a sweater, so I don't know how warm it was then with all that snow. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I would have really liked to seen Powell Street prior to the war. You know, you can visualize it, but there wasn't enough photos taken for us to, and I guess no one really thought of taking it maybe, but yeah, it's really too bad. I mean, we're quite lucky we even have photos of our family, and yeah, I think even with the school, I think it was Mr. Murakami who was the photographer who came to take all those photos at the Japanese school. Yeah, so I just happened to find it in my parents' house when we were cleaning it out. So I'm happy I kind of kept it aside. Yeah.
So,
Well, as my parents were volunteering quite a bit in the community, so I just kind of grew up learning that, and it was nice to volunteer, and especially when we had a bazaar or the Powell Street Festival, if it was a success, it was kind of satisfying to know that you were part of it, and it was just nice to see the people. And you learn to make the dishes, and you reacquaint with a lot of your classmates as well too. It was, I actually, there are a lot of other people who have gone to do volunteer work more than what I have done. It's just that in my family, my mom had gone to that school, and like there's 3 generations, so it kind of meant a little bit more to me. Yeah. So, I will try and go and help as much as I can once COVID is all lifted. Yeah. Oh, well, it was mainly to do with the bazaar time, I guess. If we were making makizushi, the rice would be ready at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we were there in the hall rolling the makizushi. Yeah, well, it was nice because I was at the school on Saturday, so we were making lunches for the teachers and the staff in the kitchen. So we just volunteered making that. And it was nice to see what was going on in the community. You learned, from the bulletin, and really, I just didn't do that much. Yeah.
I started volunteering when my daughter was 5 years old, and she started Japanese school. And because she didn't know too much Japanese. And so I used to go there every Saturday and got to meet parents of the children. And the first thing, my mother volunteered in the late 50s and 60s. She taught them how to make oboro, that's for sushi with chicken hattie. And she volunteered those years, but I didn't volunteer till 1977 when my daughter was 5 years old. And first thing I learned from Mrs. Sumikara was how to make those special eggs for sushi. And that's all, we worked together on that. And so I didn't learn to make manju or anything till later. And we worked many hours making the thin sushi, thin eggs, and for sushi. And that's where I first started. And after that, we started volunteering for all the bazaars, for selling all the good food, the manjus and everything else. Okay?
Oh, well, my father was always involved in the church, so I always used to go to the church, and we did the bulletins, and then we helped in the kitchen, and then afterwards it was always in the kitchen. And the Buddhist church, because when we first came to Vancouver, my father started it at the language school in Alexander Street, and then when they bought the property of the old United Church on Powell and whatever it is, Powell and Jackson, and then that church was really, it was dirty. It was really, really old. And then from that, I don't know when the present church was built, but my father was always involved with it. And then the family, we all went and we were involved. And my brothers were involved with the younger group, and I was more or less just went along with doing whatever was done and in the kitchen. Oh yeah, Dad always had a Sunday school thing, so we had classes upstairs in the old church there when, before it was renovated. Well, Dad was very essential in getting a core of people involved who would donate the base money to buy the property. And that's how he was involved with the church and the ongoing upkeep of the church, and he was always involved in the board and that. And then, and during those years, my mother died when I was in my early 20s, so my mother helped at that time, but we were, the family, my father has always been involved with the church, and I've always been involved in the church more than any other association, the JCCA or the language school. That was a lot of cleaning up and a lot of organizing and a lot of collating, because we did all the bulletins. In those old days, it was the old Stetner then, and so it was a lot of work involved in just getting the bulletin out. And Dad was the one that was that did the Japanese one, that was put through the Stetner. So that was a weekly thing, once a week, that we got involved in doing with the church there. So that's about all I can remember.
Okay. I was mostly a helper in the kitchen. When they were measuring for the manju, the uncle, and I would be cutting up vegetables, helping in that way. I was a helper more or less in any way I could, because I was not an expert at doing anything. So that was my volunteerism throughout the years. And I kept volunteering even if my daughter just went Japanese school till she was 12 years old. So I enjoyed it, and I was learning a lot of shortcuts and how to make manju, and they told us how to make jelly rolls and things like that. I was watching them as they make sushi, but they had so many experts that I was a go-getter for all the ingredients and measuring things out. It's manju is, what would you call it?
Pastry.
Pardon me?
Pastry.
Yeah, it's more or less a Japanese pastry with a sweet, they call it uncle, but you put that in and wrap it up and bake it in the oven, and it comes out, and paint it with butter on top and make it tasty. Yeah. So I learned a lot of tricks from all these people that were helping, and how to cut vegetables and fruit to display for bazaars. And
Yes, we went to volunteer, especially at the bazaar time, and a lot of times ahead on the Saturdays we would make the manju and they would freeze it the yaki, whatever they could freeze, they would freeze. And it was just nice to be in the kitchen and just to hear the conversation, because we can understand Japanese. And you know, it was your mom who actually taught us how to make that usuyaki tamago for the egg no sushi. And we just kind of became the two who were going to be making it for the bazaar. So it was kind of nice. I mean, it gave us that responsibility. Yeah, and you know, it was a learning process. I mean, I could have never taught myself to do that. So it was nice to go, and other people would come and help as well. And you know, just the amount of the ingredients that they had to prepare and have on hand, and you know, it was a social thing as well too. So you know, it was good. And like, you know, we were all trying to rebuild the community, and you know, the Japanese school, I think, meant a lot because we had, you know, gone there. And you know, just for it to continue, and now that it's a national heritage building, I hopefully, you know, it'll just continue.
Oh, because of my father's involvement. So he just tagged along and did whatever was to be done. It was all Joe jobs.
And what did you enjoy doing?
What did I enjoy doing? I don't think there was any enjoyment in it. It was participation.
It was a lot of hours, right?
Yeah, it was around 2-3 hours, you know. But that was part of the wheel running of the church, so you didn't think anything of it, you know. You just went along with it. And there's everybody else's families there, and everybody gets involved, you know. So it was a community thing in a way.
Oh, I love it there. I think the food is number one, and I think the people are very kind, and just knowing the language is nice because you can understand. I can only read the hiragana and the katakana, so it makes you feel part of the country when you're there as well. And there's just so much to see. Like, they've used every part of the land, and whatever they've made, it's done in detail. So I really like it. Yes.
I didn't even get to Japan once. My grandparents she lived till 80 something, and I never did see her. But my daughter and her family visited Japan and really liked it. My daughter even took a group of students from her high school and went there. Although she didn't speak very much Japanese, she was just thanking them all the time, arigato, 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 to everything she saw, and she had a very enjoyable time. And she even took her 2 boys to Japan, and they went on, they rented bicycles and went on tours and things.
Oh, I think I've been back. Well, I lived there for 2 years. Oh, when Maya was in kindergarten, we were there for 2 years. And I've been back visiting, and I had relatives in Okayama. I went there, and I had made friends in the Tokyo area because I joined the family joined the English version of the Buddhist services at the Tsukiji Honganji. So we had a core of people there, and most of the core of people there were Americans, Japanese Americans, and they lived on the base in Kantomura there. So it was a varied a group. It wasn't all Japanese in that sense. And then the kids, Derek went to a private English school in Yokohama, and Maya went to a Japanese kindergarten when she was there, and she came back when she was in grade 1. Derek is the oldest by, I think there's 7 years difference between the kids. Derek, and then Maya's the younger one. So Maya's the one that went to kindergarten in Japan, and we lived in Yokohama, and we used to go into Tokyo on the Yokohama-sen, you know, there. We used to, every weekend we used to go into town. I don't know if you would say it's a culture, because it's a form of your religious beliefs, more or less, I would think, than culture, really.
Oh, I never thought of it that way. I was just born into the Buddhist religion, so I don't know of any other religion.
I went to a Presbyterian church when I was younger, and that's where we learned many crafts. After we came to Vancouver, I would say religion didn't seem to play a big part in my life. So, but I'm still impressed with the church group. They have very nice. The organization is well done. During the war, there were many of us who were single-parented, and we were too young to go through the turmoil of. So we played all day with all my friends. All the games, we stayed out late, played all day, and that's what my youth was like. But we had so many friends and stayed out from morning dusk to dawn playing with them. And in games that they knew we learned. And we had sports things, learning to ride a bicycle and things like that. And we all learned together. But because we were so young, we enjoyed the war, evacuation days. And I'm sure a lot of people, like my sisters, had a hard time working and
Well, you just went with the flow, but life was disrupted because my parents had to start from scratch, and at one point they were laborers, and then they had to start from scratch, and then we came back, and it was always starting over. It just seems to be that way.
I think, like a lot of our parents, they never liked to talk about it, and we would ask, and they just kind of accepted it. I think in my generation, we probably wouldn't have. I don't know what we would have done, but yeah, I think a lot of their younger days, it was taken away from them. Like my uncles were taken to Angler, and I never really thought it was a prisoner of war camp, but that's what it's called. Yeah, and they were, and the awful thing I heard later was they had a shirt on with a round red sun in the back, so if they were ever caught, trying to escape, they could be shot. That was the target. But they were Canadians. They were born in Canada. And then, when they came back, like they all had their fishing boats. It was all confiscated. And yeah, it's just like Gertrude was saying that, they all had to start over again. But I think that's the one good thing. I don't know what it is. The Japanese are very resilient. Like, you see the earthquakes, whatever, like Kobe's rebuilt. You would never think there was an earthquake there. So I don't know what it is in us or where the funding comes from, but we seem to have kind of tried to rebuild that kind of life again, and they all try to start that Japantown on Powell Street again, because I do remember that part, because I was older, and now there's nothing there except for the church on Powell Street, right? Yeah, it's really too bad. I think a lot of people could have been more successful, but that part of their time was taken away. Yeah, their education. So I mean, there is a redress, but it should have gone to the people who had struggled during that time. Yeah, I mean, it's nice for them to have it known now, but the awareness is there, but I don't know, I wish they could somehow let those people get that kind of reward. Yeah. Well, I think it's hard because a lot of us are intermarried, and it's difficult. My husband was really good because, like with Christine, he would say the more languages she knew was fine, so we never had any problem with that. But yeah, I hope that it would continue, and I think the school is a good place. They have not just the Japanese school, but they have the community working with them as well too. And also, it's nice if the children could learn that second language. Yeah. And you'll find it a lot useful when you're a lot older.
I think we all adapted quite well after the war. Our people got successful, and they didn't feel any discrimination, and they're working hard to adapt to this new generation. And there's lots of young people that have mixed marriages, but they're all accepted, and they're not. That's how I feel.
That's kind of difficult because as we get older and we get educated and we all have our own careers and we all work, and we don't have a community per se unless it's in an organization, So I think it's rather difficult to keep it going, but I think involvement and individual involvement of everybody involved, I think that is the only way that it perpetuates into the future. I hope that each family, or the head of the family, retains part of their own identity and keep it alive and keep it involved, because no matter how you look at it, we're not white, we're of a mixed race, So I think you have to remember all the time that we are Japanese Canadians.